In the far reaches of the countryside, where the mornings were stitched with mist and the earth carried the scent of rain long after the clouds had vanished, my story began. I was born Eleanor, though for much of my life I felt more like a shadow than a daughter. My childhood was divided between two worlds, one of soil and silence, and another of hidden promises and unspoken fears. My father was the anchor of my young life. He dealt in two currencies, coffee beans and gemstones, and he carried the dust of both under his fingernails. To others, he was a man of business, moving easily between farm and city. To me, he was the only constant in a house ruled by absence. His boots struck the wooden veranda with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he stood, and yet sometimes I caught him staring at the horizon as if measuring a distance no map could hold. My mother was his opposite, precise, elegant, relentless. She was a dressmaker, a woman whose hands transformed fabric into beauty so sharp it could wound. Her atelier in the city was always crowded with women desperate to be reassembled under her gaze. She adored perfection, but perfection is a jealous god, and it left her with little time or perhaps little desire for tenderness. To me, her love felt like a garment she measured carefully, but never finished. I had siblings, though each one seemed born into a different destiny. The twins, restless and impatient, spoke always of leaving, of ships, of trains, of cities far beyond the reach of our mother's scissors. My younger sister, Margaret, was nearly my mirror. Nearly, but not enough. She sought her reflection in every polished surface, every perfume bottle, every stolen glance. She longed not only to be seen, but to be admired, envied, adored. And I loved her. Perhaps too much, perhaps not enough. Her love for me was sharpened by envy, a blade I would not understand until much later. Our home was divided between silence and secrets. My father often brought me along on his journeys to the city. He called me his shadow, and I clung to the title as if it were a crown. Together, we moved through streets pulsing with noise and neon, the pulse of a city that never truly slept. He showed me corners of the metropolis that no map bothered to mark. Cafes where the coffee tasted like sin, bookstores where the owners wrapped novels in brown paper as if hiding contraband, theaters where dust floated like ghosts above the stage. And then, one evening, he showed me the secret. A house, small, hidden, quiet. He unlocked the door with a key he carried like a talisman, and inside was a world that belonged only to us. A tiled floor warmed by the sun, a window framing the tower of a church. Silence, heavy enough to feel sacred. No one knows this place but you, he told me. And in that moment, I felt myself folded into adulthood, not because I was ready, but because trust can be a cruel inheritance. That house became my sanctuary. It whispered of escape, of belonging, of the possibility that some spaces could keep secrets forever. But in my bones, I already knew the truth. Secrets never rest. They linger, they grow, and when the time comes, they return to collect their debt. At 15, the world decided it was time for me to step into its spotlight, though I had no desire to perform. My father insisted I attend the debutante ball, the ritual where young girls are paraded under chandeliers like merchandise polished for sale. The salon was mercilessly lit, every surface gleaming, every smile too wide, too hungry. I moved among strangers with painted lips and men who measured me with their eyes as if calculating profit. My dress itched against my skin. My necklace, my mother's choice, felt like a chain. I was a reluctant piece in a game I didn't know the rules of. And then I saw him, Edward. He moved through the crowd as though the air had been arranged for him alone. Tall, confident, a doctor barely into his 20s with the kind of face that knew its own effect. He approached with his father at his side, carrying a small velvet box. When he opened it, the necklace inside glittered like frost under firelight. "For the beautiful birthday girl," he said, his voice practiced, steady. When he placed the necklace around my throat, the metal felt alive, almost sentient. And though I knew little of men, little of promises, those words lodged inside me like an infection. From that moment, I believed my life could be folded neatly into a future: marriage, admiration, safety. A story written in straight lines, free of shadows. But shadows do not vanish simply because you ignore them. We met in secret. We wrote letters stolen from the hands of watchful mothers and prying servants. We walked together in the square, laughing at nothing, our hands brushing like conspirators. I thought I was in love. My father watched us with an expression I could not read then, a mixture of concern and resignation, as if he already knew where the story would lead. The world bends until it breaks. One evening, my father arrived at the convent school where I studied. He said nothing as we drove back to the countryside. The city passed by, blurred and silent, as though it too held its breath. At home, I found relatives gathered, their voices hushed. My mother's face was shuttered, closed like a locked door. My sister Margaret was missing. And before anyone spoke, I knew. You always know. Edward, the man I thought was mine, had already claimed her. Margaret, only 14, a child still drawn to mirrors and shoes that clapped like applause, was carrying a burden too heavy to name, a child within a child. In another family, in another story, perhaps there might have been forgiveness, perhaps a quiet arrangement. In ours, silence became a weapon. They sent her away to my grandparents' rural home, a place drenched in quiet, a place where silence sharpens into knives. She did not return. In the night, Margaret chose the rope instead of the cradle, chose the ending no one had offered her. At 14, she cut herself from the fabric of our lives, leaving behind only questions that stung like needles. I wandered the house like a ghost myself, sleepless, hollow, every breath a betrayal. My brothers fled to Europe, writing letters for a year before silence claimed them too. My mother buried herself in work, her gowns darker, heavier, so suffused with sorrow that women wept at fittings without knowing why. And Edward, he vanished. He did not return to explain, to confess, to beg. He stepped through a door in the world and disappeared, leaving behind only ruin. The farm grew quiet, like a room abandoned mid-conversation. Every wall seemed to remember her absence. I sold it soon after, the land passing into strangers' hands for less than it was worth. I paid my brothers their share and locked the gates of my childhood behind me. I moved into the secret house in the city, the one my father had once given me as a sanctuary, but now it was no sanctuary. It was a tomb, a place where silence collected in corners and memories lingered like cobwebs. There, I tried to rebuild myself. Medical school became my salvation and my punishment. I drowned in books and sleepless nights, coffee so strong it rattled my bones. The library became my refuge, its silence a balm, its dust a strange kind of companionship. I told myself that knowledge would be armor, that if I studied hard enough, learned enough, perhaps I could sew myself back together. But you cannot study your way out of sorrow. You cannot heal yourself with fluorescent lights and textbooks. Shadows wait. and mine was patient. It was in that library, amid the smell of old paper and the whisper of turning pages, that I first saw him. He was always there in the library, always at the same table, near the tall windows where daylight fell like pale water across the floor. He carried himself with the precision of a man accustomed to silence, a man who had rearranged the air around him to suit his own gravity. His suit was modest, his posture exact. He wrote in a small black notebook with a fountain pen, turning each page as if it were made of bone. The first time he spoke to me, the sky outside was black with storm. I had arrived soaked, rain clinging to my hair and shoulders, shivering against the chill. He rose, stepped closer, and in a voice deep and resonant said, "Please, take this. You'll catch cold." He offered his coat. It was warm, not just with fabric, but with intent. His name was Anthony. A surgeon, he said, though his tone suggested he preferred the quiet corridors of hospitals over the clamor of operating theaters. "I do better with the part of life that happens between rooms," he explained, and I laughed because I understood. Corridors are honest, rooms lie. From that moment, he returned to me again and again. We began speaking after storms, then before them, until storms no longer mattered at all. He avoided small talk. Every word he chose felt deliberate, weighed, necessary. And in his presence, I discovered a new silence, one that comforted instead of suffocating. Our courtship was private, almost invisible. He disliked crowds, avoided restaurants, turned down every suggestion of cinemas or public walks. Instead, he arrived at my door with roses heavy in their vase, with meals wrapped in cloth as though each dish were a secret. Roast meats fragrant with rosemary, pasta folded like letters, bread still warm as if it had a pulse. We dined together in the small house, speaking about everything except the sharp corners of his past. When he asked me to marry him, it was without ceremony or spectacle. A plain gold band slipped onto my finger, steady and unshaking. The wedding was witnessed only by a judge, a clerk, and two men whose faces carried the quiet weight of forgotten photographs. No music, no family, no applause. It felt more like a contract written between shadows than a celebration. And yet, in that moment, I believed it was enough. Life with Anthony was narrow, exact, and strangely comforting. He woke at 4, left at 5, returned at 6. He sat in the same chair every evening, folding his hands like a penitent king. He never asked me to follow him into the noise of the world. Instead, he waited, always waiting. When I told him I was pregnant, his expression softened like old photographs, gentle, almost fragile. He placed his palm on my stomach, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." The words were not for me. They were for something else, someone else. And though it should have frightened me, it did not. I was too busy becoming a harbor. Anna was born on a night when rain turned the city into rivers. The hospital corridors overflowed with the shuffle of shoes and the hiss of wheelchairs. When they placed her on my chest, she did not cry. She stared, dark eyes steady, calm, as though she had already lived 100 lives and chosen, reluctantly, to return to this one. At home, our housekeeper Lucia shook her head, muttering prayers under her breath. She whispered, adjusting blankets that did not need adjusting. Anthony cradled her as if she might dissolve into vapor. He walked her up and down the corridor, murmuring not lullabies, but words that sounded older than language. half prayers, half confessions. Honor grew quickly, too quickly. At 6 months, she sat upright, unassisted. At 9, she watched the rain with an intensity I had only ever seen in old paintings. The pediatrician waved away my concerns, but worry clung to me like smoke. At times when Anthony carried her, I caught fragments of my name in his murmurs, entwined with syllables that were not his own. He never joined me in simple tasks, never walked beside me through shops, never accompanied us to the park, never ventured further than the threshold. He always waited, steadfast, within the walls of our home. It was the night of the fire that ended the waiting. A fuel depot on the outskirts erupted, flames clawing at the sky like some wounded beast. Ambulances shrieked through the streets. I knew Anthony would be there, wherever the injured gathered, and I knew he would not return. At dawn, a knock at the door. One of the same silent men from our wedding stood there, hat in hand, voice steady, as though rehearsed. He told me Anthony had forced open a gate no one else dared to touch, had pulled a man from the jaws of flame, that the fire had claimed him as payment. The funeral was small, almost secret. Myself, the same 3 colleagues, the clerk and judge who once signed our marriage. They handed me the death certificate and bowed their heads. I wept quietly, for grief can be tolerated only when it is discreet. And yet, even then, the silence carried unease, because when I went to Anthony's hospital, seeking his records, his files, his history, the director blinked in confusion. "Which Dr. Anthony?" he asked. And with that question, the floor beneath my life began to crumble. The hospital director's frown did not soften. "There has never been a Dr. Anthony here," he insisted, tapping the edge of his desk as though the weight of wood might hold reality steady. I argued. I showed him the death certificate. He only summoned a psychologist, a chair upholstered to look like kindness, and a tone reserved for the unstable. But madness was not the explanation. I knew what I had seen, what I had touched, what I had loved. And yet every record, every file, every ledger refused to acknowledge his existence. I went to the registry office. The marriage certificate was still there, pressed neatly between the lines of ink and stamps. The clerks examined it, nodded. "Yes, authentic," they agreed. And then came the blow. The judge and the clerk who had signed it were long dead. Dead for decades before the day I supposedly married. My stomach tightened like a fist. The men who had stood witness at our vows, also gone. Colleagues, yes, but colleagues who had died long before. Their names whispered only in memorial toasts at hospital gatherings. I had served coffee to ghosts. Everywhere I turned, doors closed. The police, when pressed, warned me with quiet menace. "For your sake, let it go." They suggested madness, hinted that I could lose custody of Anna if I continued pressing, that grief had carried me beyond reason. Bureaucracy, smooth and merciless, left me with no weapon. At home, silence grew heavy. Lucia, the housekeeper, boiled potatoes and laid soup in front of me with careful hands. And then she said the words I had been avoiding. "Mrs. Eleanor, I never saw him." My breath caught. I saw his photographs, yes, but in this house, in these rooms, never. He was gone before I arrived and gone again when I left. Always. Her voice carried no cruelty, only a grave certainty. I am of a faith that listens to ancestors. Your husband was sent here to bring a soul into this world, your daughter's soul. Someone who hurt you before, someone who came back to heal what was broken. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it away, but laughter had long ago fled my house. Her words lingered like incense. And then came the night Anna burned with fever, not the gentle heat of childhood illness, but a fire that seemed to come from the marrow of her bones. Doctors puzzled, machines whirred, prayers faltered. I sat beside her, counting her breaths until numbers themselves betrayed me. Then she opened her eyes, and it was not Anna who looked back at me. It was Margaret. I only wanted to be you, Eleanor, the voice whispered, old and broken, carried on my daughter's lips. I never meant to hurt you. Forgive me, so I may rest. The room contracted, every shadow thickening, every heartbeat echoing like a hammer against stone. I placed my hand on her forehead, and as if some ancient contract had been fulfilled, the fever receded, leaving her skin cool, her breath steady. She slept, and when she woke, she asked only for water, remembering nothing. But I remembered everything. After that night, I knew Anthony's purpose. He had been a bridge, a phantom ushering a soul back into the world, a ghost who wore the skin of a man so that the circle could close. I hired a private investigator, a man whose face carried its own fatigue. I gave him Anthony's rare surname, the scraps of identity left to me. Weeks later, he returned with a photograph of a gate in a neighboring city and an address whispered like a secret. The house beyond that gate was careful, deliberate, grass trimmed to surgical precision. A woman greeted me, Edna, with hair white as frost and bracelets that clinked like old stories. I told her my name. I placed a wedding photograph on the table. Anthony, myself, the judge lowering his pen. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her cry was not surprise, but recognition. She returned with an album, its leather crackling, its pages heavy. And there he was, Anthony, but not as my husband, her father. He had died long before she was born in a car crash on the highway, crushed against a broken gate. The same face, the same scar near the hairline, the same unruly brow. I reached into my purse, withdrew the brooch he had once given me, a stone the color of twilight set in gold. Edna's fingers trembled as she touched it. In her family's photographs, the same brooch glimmered at her mother's throat. Then I understood the word that belongs more to longing than to language, saudade, the ache for what is gone and will never return, yet still lingers like perfume on an empty chair. Anthony had never been mine, not in the way the world requires. He belonged to the corridor between life and death. He belonged to the city's secret heart, where ghosts keep their routines and houses remember what the living forget. I had married a ghost. I had buried a ghost, and my daughter carried the soul of my sister, who once envied me, and who had returned to repair the wound she left behind. But the city was not done with me yet.
The city never truly sleeps. Its veins pulse with buses and sirens. Its lights stretch endlessly against the dark. But my house learned to dream in ways that defied reason. The doorbell began to ring once at odd hours, always alone, always without visitors. When I opened the door, only the smell of bread from the corner bakery or the damp perfume of rain on asphalt greeted me. Books fell open to pages I had not chosen, their margins whispering of wounds long healed and wounds still bleeding. The clock in the sitting room stopped every night just before 8, then resumed 5 heartbeats later, as though time itself paused to let something unseen pass through. At first, I resisted. I argued with logic, tried to force the world into order. But logic is a blunt knife against ghosts. In time, I began to greet the disturbances as one greets a persistent neighbor. Annoyed, perhaps, but unwilling to shut the door completely. The city itself seemed complicit. Police officers, clerks, even priests gave the same bureaucratic mercy. For your sake, let it be. One policeman, whose eyes held too much honesty for his profession, whispered to me, "Sometimes the paper does not record what the world does." Then he looked ashamed, as if he had spoken too much. Years folded themselves neatly, one atop the other. Anna grew, her laughter sometimes ringing with the timbre of Margaret's voice. Not cruelly, not frighteningly, but with the strange tenderness of debts finally repaid. Rita, Lucia's granddaughter, became her sister in all but blood. Together they filled the house with arguments and secrets, with laughter and silence, as sisters always do. When the jacaranda trees bloomed, scattering their petals like violet confetti across the sidewalks, I sat on the veranda and thought of Margaret, of Anthony, of Lucia. I thought of all the souls who had passed through me, around me, within me. And sometimes, just sometimes, I saw Anthony at the end of the block, standing with his hands folded, patient as always. If I blinked, he was gone. If I did not, he was gone anyway. I took to wearing the brooch on Thursdays, a day overlooked by calendars, a day that belonged to no one. It seemed a safe place to keep my tenderness. If you ask me now what I believe, I would not speak of heaven or hell, of saints or sinners. I would tell you only this: the world wastes nothing, not even sorrow, especially not sorrow. The certificates remain: marriage, death, yellowed with age, brittle as old leaves. Once a month I take them out, hold them against the light, whisper the names aloud. My own, Anthony's, the witnesses who were long dead yet signed faithfully, the judge who had the courtesy to bless us from the beyond. I whisper Margaret's name. I whisper Anna's. Sometimes I confuse them, and in that confusion, I feel the universe nod, as if I have finally heard the melody correctly. Houses are not just walls and roofs. They are arrangements with the invisible. You promise to keep the floors clean, and the ghosts promise to keep their footsteps soft. My house kept Anthony for as long as it could. It sheltered Anna, even as she carried another soul. It holds me still, though I am more shadow than flesh now. And the city is a cathedral for the unproven. It allows the dead to keep their routines if they are discreet, if they do not embarrass the living with their persistence. Some nights when the streets fall quiet, I feel São Paulo, or perhaps the world itself, lean close, adjusting itself around my breathing. I have come to accept this. I married a ghost. I buried a ghost. And I raised my sister in the shape of my daughter. She forgave me for living when she could not, and I forgave her for returning the only way she knew how. The doorbell has just rung once. It does that when the story wants to finish itself. I will not open it. Whoever stands there already knows the way inside. The clock is about to stop again. I can feel it. The stillness before the pause. When it resumes, life will continue as if nothing happened. But I will know. You will know. Because if you have listened this far, then we belong to each other now, at least for tonight. Take what you can carry from my story. Leave the rest behind. And when you switch off the light, do not be alarmed if the air stirs, warm and fleeting, as though someone has passed gently through your room. It is not danger. It is not harm. It is only the city making room for another story. If you enjoyed this tale, do not forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you will be the first to receive the next chilling story. Thank you for listening.